Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to New Brick Workshop. I've always fancied making joints like this, box joints, and I've never tried it, and I've seen it done on table saws and router tables. Well, I'm going to show you in this video how to make a jig so you can make joints like these with your router table. Now let me give you an idea of what it's going to look like before we start the construction, because it will give you a better feel as the video goes forward. This is the completed jig itself, and it runs on a pair of rails that fit in the grooves which are either side of my router table. And this is a sort of profile that I used for that. Now all the jigs that I've seen in the past have had this part here, which is where you hold your piece of wood that you're about to cut. That's been mobile. Well, I've decided to make mine static, and also mine sits directly on the bed of the table. There's no piece of wood underneath here. So you do your cuts by moving this forward like so. And because this bit is static, we've got to somehow be able to create this arrangement here. Now this piece is removable, and this is what I think makes this a unique idea. In order to create this, use a little jig, like so, and this can be located exactly on there so it's in line with that opening, and the cuts can be made. I'll show you all of that later. And I've produced lots of little blanks like this so I can have these for different size cutters. This one's for an 8mm cutter. I could have them for any size cutters that I wish. It's very safe to use because there's a stop that stops it from going too far forward, so at no stage is there a risk to your hands at the back here. And all of these parts are terribly easy to make. Now I've made this out of MDF, and the reason for that is I've never made one of these before, and if it was going to go wrong, I wanted to use the cheapest material. Were I to make this again, I would make this out of really good quality plywood, probably Baltic birch plywood, and all of the bits would be really nicely finished off. But as this really for me is a prototype, I've used MDF. And I've never used this technique before, but here's what I produced. This is my first effort, and I'm really proud of it. Now there are no plans for this jig available, I'm afraid, so watch the video and make up your own sketches if you want to make one yourself. Now a really important part of this concept that I've got with this sled on the router table are pieces of wood shaped like this. And these will actually fit down into the channels. There's one on either side of the router table. And when that fits down in there, that is flush with the top surface. That means then these can be the actual runners on which I build the framework for the piece that I'm about to make. And that is perfect. Now I've taken one of my two pieces of this profile piece of wood and I've cut it into two equal length pieces. Now the parts that I've cut already are this base piece, which goes right at the very back, and it fits so that it's flush with the outside of these pieces and flush at the ends here. I'm then going to have joined onto this piece a piece like this. And this will be glued on, and it will be a permanent fixture of this piece. I'm sure you've probably seen other jigs where, in order to have the various cutouts for the particular size cutter one's using and the peg that goes in for locating the workpiece, you've probably seen people using a third piece of wood at the front here. And this is the piece of wood that would have the hole for the cutter to pass through, and also the hole where the peg is located. Well, I'm not going to have that. I'm just going to have this piece here. And in order to have the ability to have different size cutters, what I've done is I've created a shape like this. So I can have different inserts which will fit in here for each of the different cutters that I intend to use. However, in order to get these inserts properly cut out for the very first time, I would have to have the ability of moving this piece left and right. Well, because it's going to be joined on to this piece, and these pieces are fixed effectively, it's not going to be possible. So in order to overcome that, I've created this piece, which will be used in front of that piece solely for the purpose of getting these cutouts set up, which then can be transferred from this piece to that piece, and this piece then just goes out of the way when not in use. At this stage I've got to consider how I'm going to be able to position this piece so that I can do those cuts in the inset piece. And the only way to do that is to make sure it is lined up precisely with this piece. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clamp these two pieces together. They're exactly the same length, and I'm going to drill a pair of holes. And those holes will be used for some locating pegs, so that when I do the first cut in this piece, it's located with pegs, so it's absolutely in the right place, so that this area is exactly the same place that that area would be. And in order to do that, I've got some 6mm diameter brass doweling or brass rod, and I'll now take this to the pillar drill just to round off the ends. Well, I've now marked on here where I want to drill my two holes. I've also marked lines where I'm going to cut this piece because it only needs to be relatively small for doing the small operation of sorting out this insert. But I have to drill these holes at this stage because I've got to get the lining up absolutely spot on. And you can probably see here that these two slots line up pretty much perfectly. And you can probably see there's my 6mm dowel. I can now take these clamps off, and I'm going to cut this piece of wood to size, knowing that I can always relocate this relative to this thing in exactly the right place because of these two holes. Now, in order to solder the washer onto the pin, I've got a block of wood here. I've made my little rebate, which is 12mm across, and I've got my 6mm hole. I'm going to start by putting the washer in there, and I'm going to put this in the quick way round, and that's going to be so it's just flush at the top. What I'm now going to do is heat this up. I've got my fire extinguisher here, that's water in there. Just got to let that cool a bit, and hopefully that's the first pin. And there we have those two pins. Now I know this is sort of blinging it up a bit, but you know, it does show you another technique for some other projects you might wish to do. Now that I've got those two locating holes, and so my two pieces are unified in a sense, I can correct a mistake I made. And my mistake was this was too far over this way. And so in order to move that way, I'm going to stick an extra piece on the end. It's not got a clean edge at the moment, but I'll sort that out shortly. Now, before I go any further, I need to explain how I've made these various pieces in the shapes and sizes that they are. I've actually used the CNC to do this. The reason is that for me, it was the quickest way. And I appreciate that not everyone has a CNC. My alternate method would have been to have made a template. And if you've seen my template making video, you will know that with a template you've got the ability to do rebated bits and pieces with holes going all the way through or whatever else it might be. So it's not a huge challenge, but it's not something I'm covering in the video. I'm certainly not going into the detail of how I did the CNC work at all. Now, do remember when you're putting dominoes into MDF, do it gently. By having a pause every now and again, it allows the glue that may be trapped underneath, which is what's causing hydraulic locking, gives that glue a chance to ease past the domino. And the same goes when you're putting it in this way, just do it gently. And that now is absolutely spot on. I'll let that glue go off. Right, the next stage is to stick this backing board onto here. And this serves two purposes really. It does help to stiffen this up slightly, although that will be improved when I put these pieces in place. However, our little inserts that go in here need something behind them so that they don't fall backwards. So that's the main purpose. I've put a little bit of shellac on there and let it dry, and then a little bit of linseed oil, rubbed it in. So that is now pretty smooth, so it will help the inserting and the removing of those little panels. seem to have put quite a lot of clamps on it, but there's no screws or anything, no nails at all. So I think that's probably the best thing to do. I'll leave that overnight to dry. I've had this slight worry that perhaps one of these little insert pieces could get stuck in there. I wouldn't be able to remove it. So I'm going to drill a hole at the back here, which will allow me to put something down in to give it a shove. But it's not going to go absolutely all the way through, just going to go down to that layer there. And that's it. I'm just through to the back of this piece. This is one of my trial pieces, so it's not one of the actual ones. It doesn't quite fit as well as the others. I can now put something in here. Give it a little twist like so. And on this side you can see that's come down sufficiently now. There we go. So, job done. Now I've decided that I will screw the main part of the jig onto the rails and not glue it. And the reason for that is very simple. I want to be able to use this jig on the next router table I get, if there is ever a next one. And so I need to be able to remove these rails so I can put something else on to suit whatever new table I get. So I'm just going to screw them on, 3 screws each side, and it will only take me a few minutes to do this. I think one thing that I would advise people to do is when you're doing a really nice precise drilling and screwing job like this, first of all drill the top piece through with the diameter of drill that you're going to use in the piece you're screwing into. So I'm going to be using 4mm screws, therefore I'm going in with a 3mm drill. So I've pre-drilled these with 3mm drills. I'm now going to make sure everything is held where it should be. Right, so I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to drill the 3mm pilot down into the oak. So that's my pilot holes done. I'm now going to do the clearance and the countersinking on this. So this now is the final stage of assembly. I've just got a couple of sort of blingy type things to do, but we'll be able to test this very shortly. And there we have the jig itself. The only things I will add at a later stage are some form of storage for these pieces so that when this is tucked away, these pieces don't go missing at all. So something that holds them all in place. Right, now this is exciting time. We're going to test it. Now, I've never made box joints before, so this could be exciting. Now let me just describe the parts. We've got the jig we've made here and it can move to and fro. I've got the additional piece that's used for creating the first cuts in the little piece that's going to fit in there. And I've made up, just as a temporary measure, a little dust collection thing that will go just here. The reason for that is that I am sure when one starts to cut pieces of wood, there's going to be a lot of dust coming out this way. So therefore, I'm going to have this just here, close to the cutter, and I'm going to fix it in place with my odd end of that and a clamp. And the material I'm going to be cutting to form a box is some ordinary pine, cheap and cheerful stuff, and I've marked what will be the bottom of the box with a pencil line. And one has to remember that the long sides are done one way and the short sides are done another, and I hope to be able to demonstrate that. As I said, I've never done this before, so lots of scope for error. So if you see different coloured pieces of wood or pieces with knots in different places, you know I've had to have several goes. Now I've installed an 8mm cutter, and I've set its height at just a tiny dash higher than the thickness of this material. That then allows me to do a little bit of trimming once the box is all glued together. I've got my special piece that goes there, and I've written 8mm on there because this is the 8mm setup. I'm going to locate it like so. That's properly located, and I'm going to hold this in place with a clamp, and I can now do my first cut. Now I don't know whether you're able to see it from your point of view, but I can tell you now that dust collection is absolutely superb. Can you see I've got a bit of breakout there? I don't think it's going to be significant because this is where the cutter's going to be passing through every time anyway, so that's not significant. The next thing I've got to do is to set this up so I can do a second cut, which is where my peg is going to go. So I've now put a little piece of 8mm wood in that first slot I've cut. It's only placed there, it's not glued in. And I've got a second piece of the same thickness, which I'm going to use here. And I've set the cutter up so that the sharp pointy bits, the flutes, are in this plane here. I'm now just pushing gently against there, and that now has located this perfectly for the next cut. And the next cut is going to be 8mm, 8mm cutter, 8mm away from the first cut. And you can now see we've got the second cut 8mm over, and it's in that hole that I'm going to secure this piece, and that will get glued in. And there's a little bit of breakout on the back here, and I'm quite happy with that because once this is glued in, that will strengthen that. Now if I had some Baltic birch plywood, I would have made these pieces out of Baltic birch, but I didn't have any of the right size, and so that's the way it's going to be. This is, after all, a first time experiment for me. I can always make some more of these in whatever material I like. So I've now successfully made this gadget using the placeholder here, and I can put this to one side now, and we're now going to install this into the main jig. And this really is simplicity itself. Just slides in like so, and that's it in place. Now my convention is that I've marked the bottom of my box I'm going to make with some pencil lines there. And these are the short sides and there's the long sides. And I'm always going to have the box bottom on this side of me. So pencil lines will always be on that side. So I'm going to start with the tall pieces. Now the idea is that you slide this in up against the stop, hold it in place and then do a cut. Then move it along, do another cut and so on and so forth. Now what I'm not sure of is whether it's going to be easy enough to hold this in place. I think it is. Now, one thing I learnt from that first go is that when I came to the very last piece here, it was a climbing cut. In other words, it was trying to drag my piece of wood away from the jig. So for the final cut, I'm going to use a clamp. And I hope you can see there, I've got my various finger joints. There's no appreciable breakout here. Because of course that hole here is almost a perfect match. Right, now to do the short sides, which have to mesh with these, we need to have an offset so that rather than starting the first one with the top up against the peg there, we take one of the ones we've done, there's the bottom, turn it round, put the end over there. So now what we will now do is put one of these pieces here, and that now will mean the first cut will be right on the edge of that one. And because I'm new to this technique, I've just held that with the clamp. And that piece is unscathed. And you can now see that we've started an offset for these side pieces. So I'm going to continue that along now. This time that goes up against the stop in the normal way. The theory is that these two will mesh, and they do. So having done that first of the side ones, I can continue and do the rest so they're all the same. Now, because I've got arthritic wrists, it's not always easy to hold it in place just with the grip on my hands. So you can use a clamp, and I've found that you hardly lose any time at all when using the clamp. So that's it, that's all my pieces cut. I've got to now make provision for the bottom of this little tray, which is a very simple job. I'll actually do it on the router table without this jig in place. And for this simple bit of work, I'm going to set my depth to 7mm. And that's it, perfect. So I'm now set, and I'll just put my fence on and I can do those little channels for the bottom. And for these pieces, I'm going to stop about 6 or 7mm in from the end. So that's all those channels done. And now all I've got to do is cut the base to size and then assemble it. Well, it seemed to take forever to put all the glue on because there's so many surfaces which require glue, but still. I'm doing these two clamps just loosely, just to get it roughly where it should be. And then these two clamps will be a little bit tighter. So that's nice and tight. Get these two a little bit tighter now. And that's, well, it's pretty reasonable. And so I'm just going to leave that glue to dry, and then all I've got to do is to tidy up these little edges here, clean that up, give it a sand, and it'll be done. And now here's the finished product. I've sanded it all over. It's all nice and square. I'll prove that, haven't I? It really is nice and square. There, that is spot on. And I think it's probably going to be used in the greenhouse or in the garden or somewhere like that. But anyway, that's my first effort, and it's turned out really well. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.